Hi everyone, my name is Madison. This is my Facebook group, Branding Through Photography. And today we have Kristy Black, and she is going to be talking all about graphic design, the difference between branding and like branding design and graphic design and all of that good stuff. So she's got a presentation. She's going to talk to us about strategic brand design. And then if y'all have questions, just pop them in the comments below, and then I will ask her and we'll make sure everything gets covered. All right, so let's do this.
Yay, I'm so excited. Hello, everyone. So today we're talking about strategic brand design. So I'm Kristy Black, if you don't know me, and I create branding for entrepreneurial women who are too busy building empires to DIY it a moment longer. If you don't follow me on Instagram, I am a positivity powerhouse and I have the personality of a golden retriever, and I just want to hype you up, hype your business up. I've been featured in the Bezier podcast, and in addition to branding, I also do packaging, which is really just the print support component of branding. And so products that I've designed have been sold in major retailers like Urban Outfitters, Sephora, Barnes & Noble, all over. So my work is out there in the world. You might have even seen it. And I'm just so excited to be here. I've been featured in the Bezier podcast, and in addition to branding, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Hold on. I think I have
Sorry, that was me. I was trying to reply to a comment and it got all crazy.
Okay, I was like, oh no, is it me? Okay. So a little overview about what we're covering, because I like a nice outline. There'll be a little introduction about who this is for. We'll learn a little bit more about me and what it means to be a brand designer. And then we'll really dive into strategic brand design and how you can do it yourself, and learning when it might be time to outsource, since there is sort of that fine line, and then lots of time for FAQ. So who this is for is really any service or product-based entrepreneur. It's for both new and veteran business owners and anyone who's really seeking clarity in their business. I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we spend a lot of time working in our business, and so doing the work for clients, but not as much time working on our business and doing some of that back end stuff. This is also for anybody who wants tips on how to DIY your visuals. I'll share some resources for that. And anyone who wants a brand that's going to position them as the expert that your ideal clients must work with. So what if you had a brand that consistently had ideal clients begging to work with you and gave you back valuable time to invest more in your business? I am so invested in education, and so I love paper notebooks. I know a lot of people like taking notes in Google Docs, but throughout this, I highly recommend getting a pen and a paper and like taking some notes and writing down some of these questions and coming back to them later. Our brain does something really interesting when we handwrite notes, and it helps us unlock different things. So I really encourage you, if you see questions on the screen, screenshot them and maybe journal about them later, but definitely come back to them. And I also want you to come back later and reflect, why isn't this happening for you already? Why aren't your ideal clients coming to you in droves and viewing you as this expert? What has been holding you back in terms of getting your branding to a place where like you feel so confident about it, where you're like thrilled to show someone your business card or your website? Think about some of those things as well. And so, you know, normally when I'm talking to clients, the things that are holding them back are usually they just don't have time. You wear so many hats as an entrepreneur, and so there just isn't enough hours in the day to really work through all of that information. And the second thing that I hear most often is that they don't know where to even start. You know, the internet has a lot of answers, but if you aren't in the industry, it's hard to know who's a credible source, who you can really trust. And what information is actually accurate. You know, I think you see a lot of things, you get to a blog post and it's like, oh, here's how to do your branding. And you get through it and it's really just like a soft pitch the whole time. And you're like, but I just need help. So those are the things that I see most often. And so my question is, you know, how can I, Kristy Black, help you craft a brand that will allow you to scale your business and attract your dream clients with ease? So who am I? I'm Kristy, and I am a brand and design expert. I have over 10 years of experience. It's been a mix of in-house work for a multitude of clients and then also freelancing. If you're someone who cares about accolades, I do have a master's in education. And so how this shows up for me in my business is I care about making great branding accessible. I think education and tools should be accessible. And so anytime someone works with me, there's always an educational component built in because I want entrepreneurs to feel really empowered to know the rationale behind their brand, why it works, how it works, all of that sort of thing. I also have a bachelor's of science in communication with marketing and psychology minors, and man, psych minors, they come in handy. And then I also included that I completed the Second City Improv program. And I know that's super silly, but working with me is always about, there's some element of fun. I don't want people to ever feel like branding has to be this like sad chore. There is fun. It can be fun and it will be fun. And as you go through this, I think you'll find that as well. But really, all that said, my top priority is helping any entrepreneurial woman who is brave enough to start her own business. I want her to succeed, and I do that through strategic branding. So now we're going to get into the meat of it. So we're going to talk about what branding is. And so I think the way that most people think about branding is through this lens. They think about branding from the ideal client's perspective. So it's the way that you are serving your customers, it's how they experience your business and all their different interactions with you at all the different touch points and how they feel after engaging with you. As we go through this, I'm going to talk about your brand as if it were a person. And I think because branding is esoteric, it's really helpful to think about your brand as one person. And so similar to when you meet someone maybe at like a networking event or wherever, you know, in a non-COVID world, a couple weeks or a couple months later, you might not remember all the details about that person, but you will remember how they made you feel. And that's really what branding comes down to, is that long-lasting emotional connection that your clients have with you. And then, of course, there is the visual component, which is how you're conveying a sense of authority, trustworthiness, and confidence that are really aligning with your target audience's values and speaking to their unique pain points. And so this is how most people think about branding. And I can see, I mean, obviously I'm excited about it, but I understand why some people are like, yeah, it's just like a definition of branding. But I want you as entrepreneurs to realize that branding is actually a series of tools and approaches that are there to serve you. Branding is just like a hug that's like helping lift you up. And so it's gonna help you attract more ideal clients and communicate with them effectively. So what this really translates into is you're gonna be taking on fewer ho-hum projects to pay the bills because you're able to communicate with these clients why they need you specifically. It's also gonna help you streamline the creation of your visuals and marketing assets. And so what that means is you're gonna spend a lot less time struggling in Canva, knowing what fonts to use, what colors to use, because you have a system that is supporting you. It's also gonna help you gain confidence in your brand visuals. And when you show up confident, it's gonna increase your authority. It's gonna draw people in because they want that energy in their life. And then, of course, you're gonna get back valuable time. So that way you can get back to why you started your business. No one gets into the business of being an entrepreneur because they're like, wow, I love doing my own books and I love doing my own branding. No, like you started it for whatever your specialty is. And when you have branding that supports you, it allows you to do more of what you love. So branding, while most people think when I say I'm a brand designer, they're like, oh, you design logos. And yes, I do. But that's truly, the visuals are like the tip of the iceberg. So really what's at the bottom is your messaging. So if you don't have a clear messaging strategy, any supporting brand elements you create are going to be disjointed at best, and at worst, they could be driving away potential customers. And you might not even realize it because you haven't considered this messaging component. So in order to make sure that you have your messaging in a good place, you have to understand these two components to build a strategy. So you have to know who you are as a brand, the brand persona, and you have to know who your target audience is. And so if you don't have those two pieces, you can't figure out the messaging component between them. And so I have a little prompt here for anyone who's taking notes and wants to come back and journal later. If you haven't figured out your brand persona, just start by imagining your brand as one person. and describe them in as much detail as possible. This is such a great exercise. It can help you, whether you've been in business for 1 year or 10 years, it's always helpful to come back to this. And that can serve as the foundation for your brand persona if you don't already have one. So then we get into how this comes into place. I have an example to sort of describe it. So brand designers often talk about personas or archetypes, and each designer has their own archetype list that they like to work from. But one of them that's pretty common is the friend archetype. And so that's someone who is really supportive, but they're honest, they'll tell it like it is, just really encouraging. So let's say you're a virtual assistant and your brand persona is a friend type persona. And your target audience for your business is C-level executive women. So when you're looking at this slide, this arrow here is your messaging strategy. So how your brand talks to these C-level executive women is going to be very specific to those two pieces, versus someone, a virtual assistant who has a brand persona that's a rebel. So that's someone who's really pushing the status quo, seeking to change the world that they're in, and really just be their own selves, targeting someone like a solo parent woman entrepreneur. That communication strategy is going to look very different than this first one. And so if you don't know who your target audience is, it's going to hold you back. And I get a lot of clients who are like, my ideal client is everyone. And if you are for everyone, your services are for everyone, no one's listening. It seems scary, especially when you're starting out, to be like, I'm turning people away. But really what you're doing is attracting the right kind of people in. So if you're taking notes, maybe come back to this and think about how these different personas impact written communication with the target audience, and how would they impact the visuals. Start to think about some of those things, because it'll give you a lot of insight about how you can tailor what you're doing a little bit more effectively. So then what everybody's most excited about is the visuals. So this is brand identity, is another way of saying the visuals of your brand. And so over here is an example of some branding work I did for a hairstylist. And so yes, logos are a part of it, but it's also your color palette, it's your typography, it's the imagery that you use. And this could be photography, illustration, iconography, anything like that. Any custom pattern design. And then in terms of logos, ideally you have at least 3 logos. So you have your primary logo, a secondary logo, and then a submark. And so if your primary logo is, let's say it's kind of tall, like this example, your secondary logo would be like wider. It's just so that you have different formats to use in different scenarios. And really the most important aspect of all of this is doing it consistently. And I think this is where it's like a hot take. Everyone expects me to say, like, go in Canva and make a logo. And actually, I advise you don't have a logo. If you are doing it yourself, you are much better off investing your time in developing a really strong color palette, picking some typefaces, and then doing some consistent imagery and focusing all of your attention there. Because if you don't have the design skills to really build a logo, which can be pretty involved, the potential that you are going to communicate something that you don't mean to, or make your business look not as good as you would like it to, is very high. And in an age of social media where so much of it is based on the grid for Instagram or whatever platform you're using, the logo is a very small component of it. Sure, it might be your profile picture, but no one's really looking at it. Really focus your time and energy into the color palette and the typography and the imagery, and it will pay dividends far more than you trying to design a logo of your own. And again, all of this should be based on a brand persona and your target audience, and then that messaging strategy. We'll talk more about outsourcing in a minute, but if you end up outsourcing to someone to make a logo and they don't ask about your messaging strategy, if they don't ask who your ideal client is, they don't ask what your persona is, it's not going to serve you. It might be beautiful, but it will not be based in any sort of strategy to get those clients to come to you. So that's something I want you to be super mindful of. And then the other thing is that as you think about the brand persona, the audience, and the messaging strategy, it makes it a lot easier to remove yourself from that the place of judging the brand based on your own personal preferences. It takes you out of that, because I think, our businesses are our babies. We're like, oh my gosh, I love purple. I want a purple brand. But it's more so about what's going to resonate with the ideal client. And so when I think you start to think about these messaging components, you can remove yourself from that. And it also, like, if I like to think of it this way, if your business is your baby, the brand is your target audience's baby. They really own what meaning comes from that. So you have to really focus on that part. And then talk a little bit about imagery. So in terms of creating consistent imagery, really the goal is to show images that reflect your brand values while communicating the transformation your clients will have after they work with you. So things to consider are like content shown. I think a good example of this is like if you're showing your face in your feed or anywhere really, if you are someone who is like really outgoing or bubbly, maybe like me, you'll notice the images that I share of myself, I'm always smiling and trying to convey that personality. So show yourself as you are, make sure it's consistent in a way that feels aligned. Also thinking about illustration, you can also do photography or a combination. Something that people don't think about is illustration can very quickly look messy. Because unless you're working with a dedicated illustrator or you have those skills yourself, it's going to look disjointed if one day you have like a line drawing from one artist that you're showing, and then you have watercolor painting, and then you have a different color style. Like, your audience will notice it. They might not be able to articulate what feels off, but there will be a disconnect. So if you are just starting out and you're like, I don't know how to do that, just focus on photography. There's no need for you to really dive into illustration at that point. Also think about lighting that the photos use, think about the focus in the different angles and sort of play with those. And then also just different colors. You can show your brand colors through here using consistent filters and stuff like that. You can get so much inspiration. I think sometimes it's just easier to look at others to see kind of what a really curated feed looks like. And I think photographers are a great example to look at. Illustrators, bloggers, designers, influencers, anyone in a sort of visual space will give you a lot of inspiration in terms of how you can do this effectively.
Kristy, I have a quick question on the
Yeah.
photography part.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to like deciding or like adding photography into your brand, and especially if these people are kind of like doing it themselves and they're trying to keep like updated content for social media, etc., like how important is it to kind of tailor your brand around like the photography you're actually able to get? Like, for example, my apartment where I shoot a lot of photos is really dark.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the situation that I'm in. And so like, it turns out that a lot of my photos end up looking dark or, like moodier just because it's limited light. It's not like a bright, airy space. And so my brand that I have like talking to people too is not bright and airy at all.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how much do you think that like you kind of have to work with like your surroundings? How does that play a role in the brand that you put out? Like, do these people just, if they want to be bright and airy, they just have to make it a point to like go find a coffee shop or something anytime they want to take pictures? Or like, what do you recommend for that?
Yeah, and so I think you can start where you are. So if that's what you have to work with, use that. Invest maybe in some better editing software. I mean, I know Photoshop isn't the cheapest, but make things so that you can get something consistent. And as long as it's consistent, you can do other things to sort of support it. So if you're like, I wish my photos were a little bit lighter, can you show content that is lighter? So, that has the emotional feel, color aside or light aside, it feels exciting or warm or welcoming or whatever you're trying to achieve. And just accept that right now the lighting might not be that great, and just make sure you're sort of consistently like Photoshop it to a point where you're like, okay, this is a good happy in between. But then make a note. I mean, I love notebooks. And so like have a list in your notebook. I always do it at the back of the notebook, like things to invest in the future, or like things I'd like to improve, and be like, hey, maybe I want to get a ring light or a light box, or, you know, some other things that you can invest in over time. So that way, when you're like, oh, I got that big new client, I have a little bit more to invest, you can go to that list and be like, oh yeah, I did want to do that. So that would be sort of where I would start from. No one gets it right out of the gate. So you just start where you are and sort of build slowly over time.
Yep, that's great.
Okay, good. Oh, and before, let's see where we at. Okay, before I get too far on that, I do want to say, if you are, in terms of designing and like getting graphics, like if you're creating quotes or things in Canva, I wanted to include more of this, but this talk would be so forever long. But I will recommend, oh, it's going to be reverse. Of course it is. It's the Okay, good. It's the Non-Designer's Design Book. I love this book. I got this in my very first design class. Oh my gosh, so long ago, 2007. I actually bought a new copy just to make sure the book I was recommending was like still relevant. And it is amazing. This book is so helpful, and it will show you how to make a design look better almost immediately. I think it's like $30. And what I also love about it is that it is not program specific. So whether you're using Illustrator or Canva or Google Slides, these concepts will apply. So that's I should really set up an affiliate link, but I don't have one. But I just think this is a really great resource.
We'll post a link to that, guys, so don't worry.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about mood boards. So if you're starting to try to figure out what the overall aesthetic and emotion that your brand is going to be capturing, if you're just starting out, a mood board is a great way to do that. And I think you've probably seen a lot of mood boards like this. In the design world, it was very much like a 2011 through 2013 thing. But Pinterest is like, nah, it's relevant. The mood boards where it's like there's a circle and a square and a rectangle, and it's like very like carefully curated. You can do that, but I will say, as a brand designer, I don't do that. I do 9 squares. Sometimes I do 12 squares. But I say this because it can be very time consuming to be like, I want the perfect image to put in this circle and this. The whole point of a mood board is really for it to be a tool for you internally to know what emotion you're trying to convey. It's not something that's ever really outward facing. Some people share them just because they think it's fun. But there's a whole lot of photo licensing issues that come with that. So I recommend just doing it as an internal activity. And it's also really great when you do get to a point to outsource to have this to share with whoever you're going to be working with. So if you've never made a mood board, the things that I try to include, obviously you're going to have some photography. The things that you look for in photography are emotion. So what kind of emotion are they conveying? So this was for the hairstylist here. That's actually the mood board for that project. So this is the stylist here, and basically as a hairstylist, she doesn't sell hair services. She sells confidence. That's what she's selling. So I love this photo of her looking really confident, like that's what she's selling. And so she also does, you can have one, I would say, try to limit it to one image of the specific thing that you're doing. If you're a photographer, you don't have to show 4 photos of a camera. One is sufficient. That gets the general point across. And then think about things that are like the tone or maybe some lighting inspiration. You can, I would say, no more than 2 design inspirations, because if you get too many of those, it's going to start to feel a little disjointed. But also look at interiors and tiles and pattern design and those sorts of things. Draw in from as many diverse sources as you can. That's going to create something that's really intricate and you can build on over time. And what to avoid. I'm going to break a lot of hearts. I know this is beautiful. What you're looking at right now is very beautiful. But if you fall into the trap of going towards trends, you can't stand out. First of all, it might not be aligned with your messaging strategy. So again, if you were that VA who has like a friend persona communicating to C-level executives and you're like, oh, I love this kind of logo, that it has nothing to do with it. So when you follow trends, it's almost immediately going to break your messaging in half because it won't align. And it's just going to make it really, really hard to stand out. Now, I'm not going to say there's no instance in which in 2020 you would use these colors, but you better have a really, really strong reason to do it, because it's going to make it hard to stand out. So keep that in mind. And also, you know, you see a lot of this right now, and it's like hands or like plants and like all this ethereal stuff, and it's super beautiful. I love it. But if you are a VA, little witchy hands, it doesn't mean anything. It just doesn't. So I really encourage you to not follow trends if you can. It's probably the hardest advice, and I realize trends change and you might not even know that they're a trend, but I can tell you right now in 2020, we are still very, very much here.
When you say like the colors being a trend, like how do you make a color? Like, how do you choose colors that are not trendy?
Yeah, so
More like everlasting.
yeah, for sure. So there's color psychology that comes into that. And a lot of it comes down to when you're picking a color palette, it can be very easy to just go on Pinterest and like snag a whole palette that already exists. So something like this, for example. What you can do is like, okay, let's say you are a skincare company and you use all organic things and you specialize in, I don't know, like a clay mask or something. This color right here, or one of these colors, might make sense. Now, using one of those colors, but then supplementing with different colors will help differentiate it. So I'm not saying you can't use brown or, you know, taupe, but trying to differentiate them. A great tool if you're trying to like get inspiration for color palettes that isn't Pinterest. I'm old. So it used to be called Cooler by Adobe. If you type it in, it still like relinks for people like me because I can't remember the new name. It's Kuler. Adobe renamed it, but it's really awesome. You can like pull in different pictures and get color palettes from that. They also have an app now that is Adobe Capture. And so if you have like a photo of like a beautiful scene and you're like, oh, I love the colors for this, it will let you like go in and like pinpoint the different colors. And I think that's sometimes a better way to get started than just like swiping a whole pre-existing color palette.
Well, and then back to the trends part, like, you know, how long should your branding last you, especially if you're kind of a newer business and you're probably going to change, you know, a considerable amount? Like, how long should it, you know?
Yeah, at least 5 years. If it's like your first whatever, I would say 5 years. If you're at maybe the 4 or 5 year point and you've sort of figured out your niche and you're in a better lockdown place, 10 years is reasonable. But when so much is changing early on, it can change within 5 years. So that's sort of why if you're in your first year and maybe you don't have that messaging component down, that's why I'm like, lean into the color and the typography and the image style and stay there for now until you really can like lock down. Like you work with a couple clients and you're like, oh, I didn't love working with photographers, but I worked with copywriters and it was really cool. So like you learn those things as you go and slowly shift along. And then when you get to a place where you're like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm going to only work with like copywriters from now on. And then it's like, okay, now is the time where like you really want to invest more money in that.
Okay. So I have a question really quick from Tara. Let me just read for you. So how frequently should a brand look be updated? We kind of talked about that, 5 to 10 years, depending on where you are in your business. Specifically thinking of like website, business cards, and other branding materials. And then do you recommend logos be updated at all? Or should that stay consistent? And she's had the same logo since 2014, but maybe like considering she might want to change some colors, or like what other aspects should she change to adjust the brand vibe?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So if you're at a place where like you're looking at your logo now and you're like, there are aspects of it that still resonate, but maybe there are other parts where like, oh, I could probably improve this. If there's any sort of like hesitation about where your brand is at, it's probably time to look at it again. The thing that I see most often with rebrands is like they've lost the like, hey, check out my brand. And it's not just shiny object syndrome. It's where you start to feel slowly where you're like, ooh, it just isn't quite right. It's not bad, but you're just like, I feel like there's a disconnect there. So if you've changed industries or you're offering new services, you've changed who your target audience is, those are all really good indicators that it's probably time to shift. And it doesn't have to be a complete overhaul. I think a lot of times people think, sometimes it is, when you're starting out, you might have done something yourself and now it really is for a big overhaul. But sometimes if you think about brands like Coca-Cola, like there's a lot of small iterations that where it's refining and refining and refining to something, it's really just an improved version of what you already have. So you don't have to think about it as like, oh, I have to throw away what I have. You can definitely build on what you have if there are still pieces that are serving you.
Awesome. And I just want to like repeat that for everybody, like start small, like you don't have to have a logo right now. You start small. And then once you kind of figure out where you're going, then you can like start. So would you say that first part is more like the DIY part? Like you're just trying to figure out you. And then once you kind of know what's up, who you're targeting, then that's when you start working with a brand designer?
Yeah. And like definitely try to do as much of that work on your own as you can. Especially if I'm going to go into the types of designers you can hire, but the more work you can do up front, the better place you're going to be in when it's time to hire someone, because you're going to know who you want to hire. So if you're like, oh, now I know that I'm specifically working with wellness coaches. Well, now maybe you might find a brand designer who's like, I only serve wellness coaches. That's going to be a perfect fit for you. But if you don't do that work up front, you might not know to even look for that.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. All right. And that brings us, what a great transition. We're going to talk about outsourcing. So if you are at that point where you're like, I think I might need to bring in some help at this point, I'm going to talk about the types of designers that you might want to look into hiring, when and how to outsource for growth, how to prepare for hiring a designer, how to find a designer that's worth investing in. And then we're going to talk about red flags and 2 iterations, red flags that you should be looking for in a designer. And then I'm going to give you some red flags that as a designer, these are things that I'm looking for. I'm like, might not want to work with you, because nobody tells clients this. You don't know. You've never worked with anybody. So I'm like, this is the people need to know. And always my biggest tip, no matter if it's in branding or any part of your business, if there is some part of your business that really just sucks the life out of you, I want you to find someone who is lit up by that topic. And I want you to hire them for that, because that's how you're going to get the best work ever. I do not like photography. I don't ever want to take my own photography. It's very tedious to me. And I work with a photographer and she's a delight and she makes me love photography, even though I'm not doing it. So highly recommend doing that in any area of your business. So the types of designers, you might see something called a production designer or a junior or associate designer. This is pretty much where all designers start out. They know the software, they have the technical skills, but the creative execution and concept building is maybe not quite as strong. This is a great person to hire if you're like, I have an ebook and like it's in a Word doc and I just want it to like not look like crap. This is a great person to hire. They're going to be cheaper. It's a more straightforward project and they can get it done much more affordably. So that's kind of when you would look for a production designer. Then we have graphic designers overall, which is such a broad term, but there are definitely specialties within that. So people who specialize in digital, like social media or print or packaging, people usually say what they specialize in. If they don't, it's probably for one of 2 reasons. One, they're inexperienced, and so they're taking on a lot of work. No, there's only one reason. That's usually why. I take it back. There's only one. Because they're trying it all. And so they haven't really figured out what they specialize in. So it can be good to hire someone in this instance where you're like, I just need someone to do all the things. I can't possibly manage outsourcing to 2 different designers and coordinating how they're going to talk to each other. You might want to hire a jack of all trades for that. Whereas if you're at a point where you're like, okay, I have my branding done, but like now I really need help with packaging, packaging is very technical. It requires a lot of different technical know-how and connections to packaging engineers and a whole assortment of other things. Then you might want to sort of go that way. But starting out, a general jack of all trades could work. And then we have brand designers, which is where I sit. And these are designers who are a little bit more focused on strategy. So all of that messaging stuff that I talked about before, that is baked into my process, because I understand the importance of having that foundational work to create designs that speak to it. If you ever encounter a designer and you're like, I think I might want to work with them, and they're like, okay, I'll do your logo for you, but they don't ask you who your target audience is. They don't ask you what your brand persona is. If they don't do that stuff, the logos, it could be beautiful, but it is not going to do what you intended to do. So that's sort of a preemptive red flag. But the strategy part is really what sets apart brand designers from other designers. And then, of course, there are web designers. I have so much respect for web. My goal in life is to never do web design again, because it is such a specific and very detailed process. They have knowledge about how to improve click-through rates and add on, different products and all these things. That is a whole separate specialty that other people have.
Do you work with web designers to be like, here are some graphics that you can incorporate into the website? Like, is that like a, hand-holding process, like they all both work together, or how, like, or do you just completely outsource that and then they're like kind of on their own?
Yeah, it kind of goes a couple of ways, usually 3 ways. So one way is I create a brand for someone and then they're going to like Squarespace it or like Wix. And so for those people, it's like I give them brand guidelines and then the entrepreneur themselves executes it. Sometimes that's what happens when I outsource to a web designer. The client is like, hey, I have a web designer. They already have like sort of the framework set up, because truthfully, they're going to know how to set up the framework better to convert. But I'll send along the brand guidelines. And sometimes they're like, hey, can we just like collab on this? And like, it basically means I don't want to read the brand guidelines. Can you just like tell me what to do? Which is, that's fine. I'm happy to do that too. It's more of a consulting position than at that point where I'm like, okay, here's a primary color. This is kind of how this should look. This is what we should use for the buttons and stuff like that. And sometimes even that's a conversation, because there's so much more psychology to like clicking on a button that like I don't even know about. So it's often a dialogue there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, and then within all of these different types, of course, there are people that are going to niche within that. So packaging people who specialize in food packaging, or digital designers who specialize in athletic wear, like always try to find the person that is most aligned with your unique goals, because they have the most experience with it. They know what that type of client wants. So we talked a little bit about this, but knowing when to outsource, there's a couple of signs that it might be time. If you don't think you have a brand at all, this might be a time for you to start to think about outsourcing. Definitely work on your messaging on your own. Second book and final book recommendation. This is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. I freaking love this book. This is a great book to help you figure out your messaging. So definitely check this out if you're like, I don't want to invest yet. I don't have my messaging down. Start here probably, or we can talk about ways that you can work with me. But this is a great resource.
Such a good book.
Yeah, I love it. If you aren't attracting your ideal clients, where you're getting like a lot of like weird clients. This is when I first like redid my branding. I was like getting a lot of clients. I only work with women now, but I used to work with men. And I was getting a lot of like weird requests for like, can I get a logo with like a skull or like a phoenix? And I was like, this is like, I have nothing in my portfolio like this, but somehow because I was targeting everybody, it just, the floodgates were open. And I was like, oh no, like, I don't want to design your skull logo. So that was a big red flag for me personally. So I've been here. I'm not without my own challenges here. If you start to feel embarrassed by your brand, this one is very common. I get this a lot from my clients where they're like, I used to feel like really good because you have that excitement. You're like, I got my business cards. And then over time, like when someone's like, oh, can I have your business card? And you're like, mm-mm. And you like feel like that tension in your heart, that's a sign. And if you also feel like your work is disjointed, so maybe you used to specialize in a different area, or maybe COVID has made you have to pivot some of your services and now your branding just doesn't feel right. That might be a time where you have to start to look at branding again. If you don't have the skills or time to design it yourself anymore, there's a great quote where it's like, knowledge, time, and money are your three currencies. And so whichever one you need, you have to use the other two to get it. So if you are now running out of time and you don't have the knowledge, it's time to invest money to get that help. And then again, like I said, if you're pivoting in your business, that's another time where you want to transition. And hiring a designer. So a couple things to look forward here. Skills needed, obviously, if they're specializing in packaging and you need a website, not going to work. It's not going to be a good fit. So make sure they can do what you want. Look at their style. And like, you might be like, oh, they seem really fun on Instagram, but like their work doesn't look like what I want, but I'm sure they could do what I want. Don't. It's not going to help. It's not going to work out how you want it to. Make sure you like the overall style of their work, even if they have like a diverse portfolio. Everyone sort of has a style. If you can find someone that has a niche that aligns with you, that's obviously preferred. And then the thing that I think people don't really think about is like the personality match. If you can't imagine getting on a call with that person and feeling confident enough to be like, hey, I don't really think this color palette is working. If you don't think you could have a candid conversation with them and feel safe and heard, it's not going to work out. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be like that person at the salon who's getting a terrible haircut and you don't say anything and then you leave and now everyone's unhappy. So you have to make sure that you are comfortable with this person enough to be able to have that kind of open dialogue. And I just want to say, if you work with a designer, you're not going to hurt their feelings. Literally, if you're a designer, even if you've taken one design class, you've gone through a critique where literally you put your work on the wall and everyone in the class is like, that's garbage, that's garbage, that's garbage. And we have thick skin. You're not going to hurt our feelings. You don't have to do the sandwich approach where you say a nice thing and then critique it and then another nice thing. You can just say the things that you think. I hope if you have any sort of background in education or design, it should be okay. If they do take it personally, maybe cancel the contract. That's a red flag. And just try to talk to them beforehand, whether it's phone or video, just to sort of see what that process is like. Another tip is if you want to work with a designer, but you're like, it's going to be a lot of money, I don't know if I can invest in that right now, see if they have lower package offers that you can try out working with them. This is a great way to sort of test the waters and see what that process is like at maybe a lower price point. So definitely check in on that if you're feeling a little bit apprehensive. And then this, just screenshot this. I don't want to read all these questions to you, but it just seems like a lot of questions now that I'm looking at it. But these are some questions that you should be asking your designer if you want to work with them. I think the biggest one that people don't think to ask about, there's two of them. One is I would ask what additional work that falls outside of the scope looks like, because this happens a lot is like, oh, I need a logo, but I forgot I need a business card. Ask up front what that looks like if you need to add on additional things, how they handle that. And then also ask them to describe their pricing structure and just their process overall. Every designer is different and they will tell you what that's like, but it's important to kind of know what that looks like before you get into it. Okay, I love red flags. Okay, so red flags, we're almost done here. Sorry, it's kind of long. So the red flags, if anybody's like, you have to pay in full up front, huge red flag. They are probably going to take your money and run. This is not industry standard. Do not let them tell you that it's industry standard. Usually there's a retainer fee to initiate work. Sometimes it's percent-based, sometimes it's flat fee. That kind of depends on the designer. But full upfront is like a huge red flag. If they don't have a contract, this is another red flag. They could stop giving you things. You haven't agreed upon services. It's also a sign that they probably aren't very experienced. This is the one that people find the strangest, but if they ask you questions about design, this is a huge red flag because they are the designer. They should know. Like if they're like, what should the logo look like? Your question should be, well, I was hoping based on my messaging, or I was hoping you would work with me on my messaging to figure out what would be the right solution to communicate to my target audience. If they're like, do you want purple or black? No, do not work with them. They don't know what they're doing. Also, if they can't describe their process to you, they don't have a process, which means stuff's going to fall in the cracks. It's not going to get done. Make sure they have a process. And then from a designer's perspective, these are things that designers are looking for where they may or may not hire you. So if they ask you to copy someone else's work, if you're like, hey, I found this logo on Pinterest. Can you do that for me? No, can't. Illegal. No. If you ask them to work for exposure, no. If there are unrealistic timelines, sometimes things you need them fast, but be realistic about it. And if they say no, then just accept that because they know how long that's going to take. Expecting the designer to be available 24/7, texting them and all of that. No. And this is a subtle one, but using really unhelpful language. So this is like where you make assumptions like, oh, it's a quick change, a quick project. You aren't the designer. You don't know what those timelines look like, and you don't know what that designer's schedule is like. So if you use unhelpful language like that, it can be an indicator that the boundaries that we're trying to set are going to be problematic. And then this is another one. I'll have you screenshot this. But if you're going to hire a designer, it's really helpful to come up with a creative brief. So having stuff like your contact information, the deadline, some basic information about the project, and then also attaching images to sort of help communicate maybe what you're looking for is a really great way to get an accurate quote the first time around. Because there's a lot of nuance, and if you want an accurate quote and to really impress a designer, truly, if you come with them and you have a creative brief, they're gonna be like, what? Ideal client, come work with me, because it makes everyone's life so much easier. And where to look for designers, you can look, asking for referrals, I would say is the best place to start. Of course, Instagram, even asking your Instagram like friends who they've used. You might not know them in person, but there's always connections to be made. Dribble is a really great website just for designers where you can look, and then Behance.
On Instagram, do you, as a graphic designer, do you use like certain hashtags that, you know, like you hope ideal clients search for you and find?
Not particularly. No, I will say, admittedly, I'm not the best Instagram marketer. That is not truly, I am in the process of outsourcing a lot of that because it is truly not my forte.
But would you say, like, for people to look on Instagram, would it just be like hashtag whatever your city graphic designer or brand designer, something like that?
Yeah, or brand designer. I think brand designer would probably give you better results. The other thing you could do is if you have like creative groups, I use Honeybook, so they have like the Rising Tide Society. If you go on like Rising Tide Society's Instagram and like you go through their followers and stuff like that, that might be a way, and then just search for like designer. So yeah. And then just a quick overview of things that I offer is I have the brand discovery workbook. This is where all of my branding projects start. It is $50. It's 80 questions that help you figure out your brand messaging, that whole bottom part of the iceberg that really sets you up for success. I would say this is a really great resource in addition to this book. If you have this book and you have the brand discovery workbook, like you are set up, like you will know where you're going. From there, I also have the visual brand foundations. So this is where I take the brand discovery workbook. I translate it into some brand keywords, a brand summary, a mood board for you, and a color palette. So this is a really great place to start off. If you're just like, I just need a little help, like I just want someone to get me up to a certain point. If you don't feel comfortable working through some of that stuff, that's also an option. And then I have a DIY brand course. It's going to come out, I'm not sure when, probably Q1 of next year, where I will walk through more specifically about how to choose your colors, how to choose your typefaces, how to do your mood board more specifically, and get that brand into a place where you feel good with it. So that will be coming. You can get on the wait list. I will post a link under our little video where you can get on that wait list. And then I have 3 branding packages. If you're like, fix it for me, I have those options. I have a new, because I believe in accessibility. In the past, I have only offered really involved brand experiences. But because of COVID and how it has impacted a lot of entrepreneurs' lives, I've created an even more pared down package. This is the first time I'm publicly announcing it. It's happened. I've done some of them in the background, but this is the first time I'm really promoting it, is that it's just a basic logo package. So you get the brand discovery workbook, you'll get the buzzwords, the summary, the mood board, the color palette, and you will get one logo. It will just be your primary logo, but that's better than no logo. And also I do payment plans for everything. I believe in payment plans. There's a 25% retainer fee for any project, but then after that, you have 6 months to break up the remaining balance. So then from there, I have the budget brand experience. So you're getting everything from the logo package, but you get even more. You get a secondary logo, you get a submark, you're getting a brand board, typography recommendations, all of that sort of stuff. I would say this is my most popular package. And then I have the complete brand experience, which has even more stuff. Y'all can read it. I'm tired.
Well, that was awesome. Guys, like give it up for Kristy. Like, geez, she just went through all of it. I had a whole list of questions and she answered all of them. So does anyone have any any questions that they want to ask her while we're still on? She'll definitely be like hanging around too if we want to drop them in the comments later, if you're catching the replay. So we can always tag her and grab that later. That was awesome. Like I don't feel like I have any like additional questions for you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Actually, I did have like one really small question, and then other than that, so when people are looking for a brand designer, do they already know where, like, do people already know what their messaging is, or do they come to you and then y'all like brainstorm it out?
I would say like 90% don't. It's very rare that someone has that figured out. If they're like, hey, usually in the DMs is when they're like, I want to figure it out, but I don't know where to start. I let them know that like that brand discovery workbook component is built into everything. So no matter what we move forward with, you will have that. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention on that note is like, if you invest in the brand discovery workbook now, and then in like 6 months, you're like, oh, hey, I want to do your basic logo package. I subtract that initial investment from the ticket price because it's included in all of these other packages. It gets deducted. Same thing for the visual brand foundation. So actually what happens a lot of times is someone comes to me, they don't have their messaging. We start with just a brand discovery workbook. And then they're like, hey, that was like pretty helpful. And so either immediately after or shortly thereafter, they will do the visual brand foundations. And then over time, they will invest in a bigger package.
Okay. So that's really cool. And then like, if you do that, I assume that you can just like update that too, because it's like a document. So if things change, then you can,
Yep.
change with that. Okay. So I'm just checking to see if we're still good. I don't have any questions on here. But definitely, like I said, if there are any questions, we can always like tag you.
Yeah.
That was like so helpful. I think a lot of people are they're just like in that stage of, is it time? Is it not?
Yeah.
Time? And so, yeah, I don't even have anything to add there. So thank you so much for coming and, just dropping all of this knowledge on brand design. I had no idea that there were so many different kinds of like designers and that they had specialties. It's like I get call all the time for just random photography and I'm like, okay, yeah, like you have like a niche, but then you can just do it. So I kind of thought like graphic designers were kind of on the same like page, but I think that there's a lot more like that goes into like what their specialty is. So yeah, that was awesome. Thank you again for being here, and I will tag you for other questions. Guys, we're going to link all of her stuff in the comments, and yeah, and I took a few screenshots, and we're going to link the books and all that stuff. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Yes, ask questions if you have it, and thanks again, everybody.
All right, bye guys.